When you share your bed with your own jailer, even your dreams become prisoners. For 37 years, I smiled in public while bleeding on the inside. Good morning, my dears. This is Grandma Janet, 68 years young, speaking to you from my porch in Monterey, California, with a view of the ocean I can now freely enjoy. Looking at me now, with my plants, my knitting, and my morning coffee, no one would ever imagine the life I left behind. Before diving into my story, I want to sincerely thank each one of you who's there on the other side, giving me a little bit of your time. If this story touches your heart, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of America you're watching from. I love knowing where the people who share this journey with me come from. Each of your messages is a gift that I cherish. I was born in 1957, in an era when women were raised to marry, have children, and obey. I grew up in East Oakland, a humble neighborhood of Oakland, California, in a small wooden house that always needed repairs. My father was a factory worker, one of those who left before dawn and returned with whatever God and the foreman allowed. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families, her hands always wrinkled from being in water, even on scorching hot summer days in California. I only studied until 4th grade. Not for lack of desire. I loved books, stories, numbers, but because girls don't need much schooling, as my father said, just enough not to be cheated at the store and to read the Bible. I believed that for a long time, like almost all women of my generation. I met James when I was 17 during a 4th of July celebration in Oakland. He was handsome, 28 years old, worked as a security guard at an important bank in the city, and seemed like a prince compared to the simple boys from my neighborhood. When he looked at me for the first time with those green eyes, a rarity in our area, I felt butterflies in my stomach that I confused with love. Today I know it was fear giving its first warning, but back then, who would have taught me the difference? The courtship was quick, only 6 months. James was romantic in a way that left me breathless. Flowers, small gifts, sweet words. My parents adored him, an older, established religious man who promised to take care of their daughter like a treasure. And he kept that promise, yes. He just didn't explain that you take care of a treasure by locking it in a safe, away from others' eyes. We married in early 1975. The ceremony was simple, at the neighborhood church, followed by a reception in my parents' backyard. I remember my white dress, sewn by my mother with fabric she saved months to buy. I remember the 3-tiered cake, a luxury I had never seen before. I remember my father's proud smile as he walked me down the aisle. And I remember, with a clarity that haunts me to this day, the phrase James whispered in my ear as we danced. "Now you're only mine, forever." In that moment, it sounded romantic. I didn't notice the only hidden there, the exclusivity that wasn't a declaration of love, but of possession. Our house was nice by the standards of the time. A small but well-built 2-story in East Oakland, with 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and even a small yard where I planted my first flowers. James had saved for years to buy it and made sure to remind me of that whenever possible. "I gave you a roof that not even your father could provide," he would say, as if each brick in that building was an invisible chain binding me to him. The first signs came early, small, subtle, disguised as care and love. James wanted to know where I went, who I talked to, what we discussed. He checked the time when I returned from the grocery store, counted the change to see if I hadn't spent money on other things. "It's because I worry about you, my love," he justified. And I believed it, because I had been taught that a husband who cares is a husband who loves. I stopped seeing my childhood friends because he thought they were loose women who could badly influence me. I stopped visiting my family frequently because he said a married woman has to take care of her own house first. The world outside grew smaller, shrinking until it fit entirely within the walls of that house in East Oakland. When I got pregnant with our first daughter, James seemed happy, but the control increased. "Now you carry my blood inside you," he would say, caressing my belly as if it were an extension of himself, not an independent being growing there. The pregnancy was difficult, with severe morning sickness and high blood pressure that made me dizzy. The doctor recommended rest, and James turned that into complete imprisonment. "You don't leave this bed without my permission," he would order before going to work. And to make sure, he started bringing his mother, Mrs. Eleanor, to take care of me during the day. That woman with her harsh gaze and rough hands was his spy, reporting my every movement, every sigh, every visitor I received. Marina was born on a hot December night in 1976. Difficult birth, the kind that makes you think you won't survive. James wasn't at the hospital. A man's place isn't in the delivery room, he said, and went to play poker with friends while I struggled between life and death for 14 hours. When I finally held my daughter in my arms, something inside me changed. A love so great, so complete, that no prison could contain it. I'll give you a different life, I silently promised that little creature with startled eyes looking up at me. You will be free. But how could I give freedom to someone when I didn't have it myself? The years passed, and the cage grew tighter. James built a perfect system. I had no money of my own, no friends, nowhere to go. My parents had passed away, one right after the other, as if one didn't know how to live without their lifelong companion. My brothers had scattered across America, one in Chicago, another in Atlanta, too far away to notice what was happening to me. James's jealousy was a living creature that grew and fed on every small incident. If the baker smiled at me, it was because we were having an affair. If the neighbor invited me for coffee, it was because she wanted to introduce me to some man. If I was 5 minutes late from the grocery store, it was because I had met a lover. You think I don't know what goes on in that little head of yours? He would yell, tapping his finger against my forehead as if he wanted to drill through it. You think I don't see how men look at you? How you sway when you walk down the street? I learned to walk with my eyes down, to wear loose clothing even in the suffocating Oakland heat, to make myself invisible. It was safer that way. Because when James's jealousy exploded, the screams came first, then the pushing, then worse things that still hurt to remember today. Marina grew up watching everything with frightened eyes. Intelligent girl, too sensitive for the environment where she lived. At school, she was quiet, kept to herself, as they say nowadays. At home, she tried to make herself small, invisible, like me. Sometimes, when James was at work, we allowed ourselves small freedoms. We sang together while I did the laundry, made up crazy stories, laughed until our stomachs hurt. But as soon as we heard the gate open, we went back to being silent shadows, each in our corner. "Why is Dad like this?" she asked me once, at 8 years old, after James broke all the dishes in the house because dinner was late. "Doesn't he like us?" How do you explain to a child that love sometimes comes so mixed with possession that it becomes unrecognizable? How to say that the man she called father did love me, yes, but in a way that hurt, that suffocated, that killed slowly? "Your father has problems, honey," I answered, hugging her tight. "But that's not your fault. Never, ever think it's your fault. The fault was mine," I thought at the time, for not being good enough, for not being able to calm that man, for not knowing how to escape that life without putting my daughter at risk. The 80s arrived with their vibrant colors, their upbeat music, their promise of freedom. America was changing. Women were beginning to occupy previously forbidden spaces. The television showed a world that I could only observe from afar, through the small screen of our black and white TV, the only luxury James allowed because he liked to watch football. It was on that television that I watched, fascinated, women talking about rights, about independence, about choices. Something awakened inside me, a small but stubborn seed of rebellion that I didn't even know existed. I started saving coins, some left over from grocery shopping, others I found in James's clothes when washing them. I hid them in a hole I dug under the kitchen cabinet, covering it with a piece of wood and a rug. It wasn't much, cents per week, but it was mine. My little treasure, my possibility of a future. I got a secret job. I did laundry for the convenience store owner, who paid me with food that I told James I had gotten cheaper at the grocery store. Small lies, small rebellions that kept me sane. Marina, now 10 years old, was my silent accomplice, helping to invent excuses, to create our secret world inside that prison. "One day we'll get out of here, Mom," she would whisper when we were alone, with a wisdom no child should have. "One day you'll be truly happy." I would smile, stroke her hair, but didn't really believe it. The cage had become so familiar that freedom scared me almost as much as the prison. Until that Sunday in 1987 arrived. A day that started like any other and ended up changing everything. The day when, after 12 years living in the shadow of fear, I decided I needed to feel the sun on my face, even if just for a few hours. There comes a moment in the life of every imprisoned person when something simply breaks, like an elastic stretched beyond its limit, like a dam that can no longer withstand the pressure of water. For me, that moment came on a Sunday in April 1987, with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of church bells in the distance. I woke up before James that morning. The sun came through the cracks in the window, drawing golden lines on the worn wooden floor. I sat watching that light for a while, thinking about how it traveled freely, entering homes without asking permission, touching everything it found along the way. What freedom would that be, to exist like light? Marina, at 11 years old, was still sleeping in the room next door. James was snoring heavily, the result of the whiskey from the night before. Saturdays were always like this. He went out with friends, came home staggering in the early morning, woke up in a bad mood. It was the only day I was sure he would sleep late, the only day I could breathe without feeling his gaze watching me. I prepared coffee slowly, savoring that rare silence. That's when I heard light knocks on the back door. My heart raced. Unplanned visits were always a cause for problems with James. I opened just a crack, ready to dismiss whoever it was. It was Zoe, my neighbor for more than 5 years, but with whom I barely spoke beyond a hurried good morning when we crossed paths at the market. A strong woman, the kind of Californian who carries the sun in her smile even when life is hard. "Mrs. Janet," she whispered, noticing my frightened look. "I just came to invite you for tea at my house this afternoon. The ladies from the street are getting together. Something simple, just to chat a bit." I opened my mouth to automatically refuse, as I always did. "I can't, my husband." The words came out mechanically, rehearsed through years of isolation. Zoe smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "Mr. James won't even know. He goes out every Sunday afternoon to play poker with his friends at Frank's bar, doesn't he? You just come for a little while, have some tea, talk with people your own age. How long has it been since you've done that?" So long that I couldn't even remember what it was like. The feeling of sitting with other women, talking about simple things, laughing without fear, existing beyond the walls of that house. "I'll think about it," I answered, quickly closing the door when I heard a noise coming from our bedroom. The day followed its normal routine. James woke up in a bad mood, complained about the coffee, found fault with the clothes Marina had set aside for church. After lunch, as Zoe had predicted, he got ready to go out. "Going to play cards with the guys," he announced, as if he were doing me a favor by letting me know. "Don't wait up for dinner, and don't leave this house." The last sentence was always the same, repeated like a mantra before each departure. An order, a veiled threat, a reminder of my condition. When the door slammed and the sound of his footsteps disappeared down the street, something strange happened inside me. A silent decision took shape, like a seed that germinates after years lying dormant, waiting for the right moment. "Marina," I called my daughter, who was reading a school book in her room. "Let's go out for a little while." Her eyes widened, mixing surprise and fear. "But Dad said," "Just for a little bit," I cut in, with a firmness in my voice that even I didn't recognize. "We're going to Mrs. Zoe's house, right next door. I'll be back before your father." I got ready carefully, choosing a simple dress that I hadn't worn in years. I combed my hair, applied a light lipstick that I had kept at the bottom of the drawer. In the mirror, a woman I barely recognized stared back at me, still young, at 30, but with tired eyes that seemed much older. Marina watched me in silence, a mixture of admiration and concern on her face. "You look pretty, Mom." I smiled, adjusting a strand of her hair. "Stay here, honey. If your father comes back, tell him I went to buy medicine for a headache and that I'll be right back." Lies were necessary to survive in that house. We had a code, my daughter and I, small lies that protected us from James's explosions. I hated teaching her to lie, but I hated even more the idea of her growing up thinking that living as I lived was normal. My heart almost leaped out of my mouth when I crossed our front gate. 5 steps to the street, 10 more to Zoe's house. 15 steps that seemed like a marathon, each one taking me away from the familiar safety of my prison, bringing me closer to a world that had become strange to me. Zoe opened the door with a smile so big it lit up her entire face. "I thought you weren't coming. Come in, come in." The small living room was full of women, about 6 or 7. Some I vaguely recognized from the few times I went to the grocery store or church. They all stopped talking when I entered, looking at me with barely disguised curiosity. "Everyone, this is Janet, my neighbor," Zoe introduced. "First time she's coming to our little Sunday gathering." The smiles were warm, the greetings sincere. I sat awkwardly on the edge of the sofa, accepting a cup of lemon balm tea that smelled of comfort and childhood. The conversation slowly resumed, neighborhood gossip, recipes exchanged, small victories, and defeats of everyday life. It was Susan, an older lady with completely white hair, who asked directly, "And your husband, Janet? I know that James keeps a tight leash. Did he let you come just like that, without problems?" A silence fell over the room. They all knew, I realized. They all saw the marks, heard the screams, understood the lowered eyes and the rehearsed excuses. "He doesn't know," I admitted, my voice almost a whisper. "He went out to play poker. I have to get back before him." Susan shook her head, exchanging glances with the others. "Girl, you're living in hell and still standing. That's strength you don't even know you have." The tears came without warning, like a summer storm that breaks without clouds in the sky. Years of repressed pain, of constant fear, of crushing loneliness. I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a little girl, sobs that shook my entire body, while those women, strangers who suddenly seemed like sisters, surrounded me in a collective embrace. "I'm sorry," I muttered when I could finally breathe. "I don't know what came over me." "What came over you is that you're human, child," Susan replied, holding my hands between hers, calloused from a lifetime of hard work. "And humans weren't born to live in cages." The stories began to flow then. Each of those women had her own version of a cage. Some had escaped, others still lived trapped. Some had found small freedoms within their own limitations. I heard about Mary, who fled from her violent husband with 3 small children and now owned a small diner downtown. About Connie, who at 60 finally learned to read and write in secret from her husband, who thought education is for loose women. About Joan, who lost her son to drugs but found the strength to go on and now coordinated a support group for mothers in the same situation. Stories of pain, yes, but also of resistance. Of women who, like stubborn plants growing in the cracks of concrete, found ways to survive, to flourish even in the most hostile environments. Time passed too quickly. When I realized, the sun was already low on the horizon, painting the Oakland sky with shades of orange and red. "My God, I need to go." I got up startled, the panic returning like an icy wave. "James will be back soon." Zoe took a piece of paper, quickly wrote something down. "Take this, keep it with you. It's my sister's phone number who lives downtown. Anything, anytime you can call." I kept the paper in my bra, the only place James didn't search. I hugged each of those women with an affection I didn't know still existed inside me, promised to return next Sunday, and ran home, my heart in my throat, my head full of new, dangerous, liberating ideas. I entered through the back, relieved to see that the house was still quiet. Marina came running to meet me in the kitchen, her eyes wide. "Dad called from the bar," she said, her voice trembling. "He said he was coming back early because the game ended. I told him you had gone to buy medicine." My blood froze. Quickly, I took off the dress, washed my face, removing any trace of lipstick, tied my hair in the tight bun that James preferred. I opened a packet of drink mix and spread a little on the table to give the impression that I had just arrived with groceries. Not 5 minutes had passed when I heard the gate open violently. James entered like a hurricane, his eyes already red from drinking, the smell of whiskey ingrained in his clothes. "Where is she?" he shouted when he saw Marina alone in the living room. When he saw me in the kitchen, he came towards me with heavy steps. "Where were you?" "I went to the pharmacy to buy medicine for a headache," I replied, showing a blister pack of painkillers that I always kept hidden for emergencies like this. "I wasn't feeling well." He grabbed my arm forcefully, pulling me close. His eyes scanned my face, looking for signs of lying. "You're different. There's something different about you." Fear was familiar, an old companion that had lived in my chest for years. But now there was something new mixed with it. A small flame of anger, of indignation, of awareness that I deserved more than that life. "There's nothing different," I replied, holding his gaze for the first time in a very long time. "Just a headache." It was enough. That small act of rebellion, of looking him in the eyes instead of lowering my head, was like lighting a match near gasoline. The slap came hard, throwing me against the kitchen cabinet. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth when I bit my lip from the impact. "You're lying to me?" he growled, grabbing my hair. "You think I'm an idiot? I smelled perfume when I came in. Who were you with?" "No one," I shouted, the sharp pain in my scalp bringing tears to my eyes. "Let me go, James. You're hurting me." Marina appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face pale with terror. "Dad, stop! Mom just went to the pharmacy, I saw." James ignored her, continuing to shake me by the hair, banging my head against the wall while shouting increasingly absurd accusations. That I had a lover, that I was planning to run away, that I wanted to abandon him after everything he had done for me. What happened next still seems like a confused dream when I try to remember. Marina, my 11-year-old girl, small but fierce in defense of her mother, took the kettle that was on the stove and threw hot water on James's back. It wasn't boiling water. Thank God it hadn't reached that point, but it was hot enough to cause pain and surprise. He roared, releasing me instantly, turning to Marina with an expression I'll never forget. Pure hatred, pure violence. "You little brat!" He advanced towards her, his fist raised. Something exploded inside me at that moment. A strength I didn't know existed. A courage born from the deepest despair. I threw myself between them, protecting my daughter with my own body. "Not her!" I shouted, a beast defending her cub. "You hit me. You take out your frustrations on me. Not her, James. Never her." He stopped, surprised by my reaction. We stared at each other for a moment that seemed eternal. Me, bleeding and disheveled but standing. Him, red with rage and alcohol, his fist still raised. "You two have lost your minds," he finally said, lowering his arm. "We'll talk tomorrow. When I get back from work, I want this house in order and you two with your heads in the right place." He left, slamming the door, probably back to the bar for more drinks and to cool off. We stayed there, Marina and I, hugging on the kitchen floor, trembling like leaves in the wind. "Mom," she whispered, touching the cut on my lip with delicate fingers. "We can't stay here anymore." I looked at my daughter, so young and yet so wise, so small and yet so brave, and knew she was right. What had happened today crossed all lines. If James was capable of raising his hand to her, there were no more limits. There was no more possible safety within those walls. "We won't stay," I promised, kissing her forehead, feeling a new determination growing inside me. "But we need a plan. We need to be smart." That night, while James snored heavily in the bedroom, too drunk to notice our absence, Marina and I sat in the dark kitchen, planning our escape in urgent whispers. The money I had hidden for years. It wasn't much, but maybe enough for a few weeks. The phone number Zoe had given me. The few pieces of clothing we could carry. The best time to leave without being noticed. It was a plan full of flaws, uncertainties, risks. But for the first time in many years, I felt something different from the constant fear that had become my daily companion. I felt hope, a hope as fragile as the first sprout after a drought, but alive and real. The day had started like any other and was ending with everything crumbling around me. My illusions of safety, my acceptance of that life, my submission to the destiny that others had chosen for me. Among the rubble, however, something new was being born. Something that didn't yet have a name, but that would keep me awake that entire night, planning, calculating, finding a courage I didn't know I possessed. In the midst of destruction, I found the first glimpse of freedom. And like a prisoner who sees the cell door open for the first time, I could no longer ignore the possibility of escape. The longest night of my life wasn't the one when I gave birth to Marina after 14 hours of labor, nor the one when I held vigil for my father, feeling that I was losing my last protector in this world. It was the night I spent awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching James sleep, thinking how easy it would be to end everything right there. The weight of the kitchen knife in my lap was disturbing. I held it firmly, my knuckles white with so much force, imagining what it would be like to plunge that blade into the chest of the man who had turned my life into a nightmare. A quick movement, an instant of courage, and it would all be over. Would it be considered self-defense? Or would I spend the rest of my life in jail, leaving Marina alone in the world? I don't know how long I sat there, divided between despair and fear. James's heavy breathing, laden with alcohol, filled the room. He seemed so harmless sleeping. Hard to believe that those same hands resting on his chest had hours earlier banged my head against the kitchen wall. The early morning advanced slowly. The sounds of the sleeping city filtered through the half-open window. A dog barking in the distance, the distant crowing of a rooster, confusing night with dawn, the occasional buzz of a motorcycle passing on the street. The world continued its course, indifferent to the drama unfolding within those four walls. When the first rays of sun began to gild the horizon, I put the knife in my apron and returned to the kitchen. This wasn't how I would solve my problems. I wouldn't stain my hands with blood, wouldn't kill in front of my daughter the father who, despite everything, she still loved in some twisted and complicated way. I needed to find another path. James woke up in a bad mood as always, the hangover aggravating his already difficult temperament. He didn't even mention the events of the previous night, as if they had been erased from his memory along with the last shots of whiskey. Or perhaps it was just his way of maintaining control, pretending nothing had happened, that he hadn't crossed another line, that he hadn't almost hit his own daughter. "My coffee," he demanded, sitting at the table with his shirt unbuttoned, his face swollen, his eyes red. I served in silence, my entire body aching from the blows of the previous day, a bruise darkening at the corner of my mouth where his fist had met my face. He ate without looking at me, checked his watch, muttered something about being late for work. Before leaving, he stopped at the door, finally facing me with those green eyes that once seemed beautiful to me and now only gave me chills. "When I get back, I want this house in order. And no going out, understand? Later we'll talk about yesterday." That "we'll talk" was a veiled threat I knew all too well. It meant more shouting, maybe more violence. The punishment for daring to defy him. As soon as the door slammed behind him, I let out the breath I didn't even realize I was holding. I had few hours to act. Marina appeared in the kitchen, her eyes swollen from barely sleeping, a determined look I had never seen before on my little girl's face. "We're leaving today, aren't we, Mom?" I nodded, unable to trust my own voice. The plan was simple, desperately simple. We would take the hidden money, some clothes, important documents, and leave while James was at work. We would go to the bus station, buy tickets to the farthest place we could afford, disappear from his life forever. But the simplest plans are often the first to crumble. As I rummaged through the hiding place under the kitchen cabinet, panic hit me like a punch to the stomach. The money wasn't there. The coins and bills I had carefully gathered for years, my little secret treasure, had disappeared. In their place, only an empty space and a note scribbled in handwriting I immediately recognized. "Did you really think I didn't know about your little secret? My woman doesn't keep hidden money." I fell to my knees on the kitchen floor, a silent scream stuck in my throat. He knew. Perhaps he had always known. He had let me believe I had this small control, this minimal independence, only to show me, at the crucial moment, that even this was an illusion. Marina found me like that, kneeling in front of the empty hiding place, the crumpled note in my hand, silent tears streaming down my face. "What's wrong, Mom?" I showed her the note, unable to elaborate. She read it quickly, her eyes widening in understanding and horror. "What are we going to do now?" A question so simple and so impossible to answer. Without money, where would we go? How would we survive? How would I protect my daughter not only from James, but from hunger, cold, the streets? It was in this moment of absolute despair that I remembered the paper Zoe had given me, her sister's phone number downtown. A thin line of hope, fragile as a spider's web thread, but the only one left. "I'm going to call Zoe's sister," I decided, getting up with difficulty. "We're going to ask for help." The nearest payphone was 2 blocks from home. It had never seemed so far away. I quickly got Marina ready, inventing an excuse in case any neighbor asked where we were going. If anyone asks, we're going to buy school supplies for you. New notebook, pencils, those things. On the way, everyone who passed by us seemed like a potential spy for James. Every look was a threat. Every smile hid ulterior motives. Years of living under constant surveillance had turned me into a paranoid person, distrustful even of my own shadow. The quarter trembled in my hand when we finally reached the payphone. I dialed the number several times, getting the digits wrong from nervousness until I finally completed the call. Each ring was a small agony. What if no one answered? What if the number was wrong? What if, hello? The female voice on the other end of the line was like music. I quickly explained who I was, mentioning Zoe, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. I need help, I finally admitted, my voice breaking. My husband. I can't stay at home anymore. I have my daughter. We have nowhere to go. There was a moment of silence that seemed eternal. Then, words that changed everything. Come here. Write down the address. I'll wait for you. I would have fainted with relief if I weren't holding the phone so tightly. I wrote down the address on a small piece of paper I carried in my pocket, thanked repeatedly, hung up with trembling hands. And now, Mom? Marina asked, holding my hand tightly. How will we get there without money? A good question. The address was downtown, too far to walk, especially with a child. I had no money for the bus, much less for a taxi. That's when I saw Susan, the white-haired lady from the Sunday gathering, coming out of the bakery near the phone. A coincidence? A sign? It didn't matter. It was the only chance we had. Mrs. Susan, I called, waving discreetly. She turned, taking a moment to recognize me. When she did, her face lit up with a smile that quickly disappeared when she saw my state, the bruise on my face, the red eyes, the expression of barely contained despair. Girl, what happened to you? The words came in a torrent, uncontrolled, years of secrets and shame finally breaking the barrier of silence. I told her about the violence of the previous night, about our decision to flee, about the stolen money, about the call I had just made. Susan listened to everything in silence, her dark eyes filling with a mixture of compassion and determination. When I finished, she simply opened the crochet bag she carried, took out some crumpled bills, and handed them to me. It's not much, but it's enough for the bus downtown and to eat something on the way. Go, girl, go and don't look back. I tried to refuse. It was already too much to ask for a ride on Sunday, let alone money on a Monday. But Susan closed my hand around the bills with surprising firmness for someone with such wrinkled hands. One day, you'll help another who's going through the same thing, she said simply. That's how we survive in this world. The hug we exchanged was brief, but intense, loaded with a solidarity that transcended words. I took Marina by the hand, and we ran to the bus stop, my heart racing with fear and hope in equal parts. The bus ride downtown was a blur of anxiety. Each stop seemed to last an eternity. Each new passenger who got on could be someone sent by James to follow us. The drowsy driver looked at us curiously when we got on. Me, with my face marked by violence. Marina, clutching my hand as if her life depended on it. What he thought, I'll never know. Perhaps he had seen many like us over the years, fleeing from homes that were no longer safe. The address that Zoe's sister had provided was for a simple house in the old part of downtown San Francisco, on one of those narrow streets of cobblestones that guard the history of the city. We stopped in front of the indicated number, hesitant, gathering courage to knock on the door. It was Marina who finally stepped forward, knocking 3 times with her knuckles on the worn wood. Seconds later, the door opened, revealing a middle-aged woman with the same kind eyes as Zoe, but a face more marked by life. "Janet?" she asked, looking directly at my bruise without showing shock or pity. When I nodded, she simply opened the door wider. "Come in. You're safe now." Safe. A word I hadn't heard in so long that I had almost forgotten its meaning. Safe meant not having to constantly look over my shoulder. It meant not trembling when hearing footsteps approaching. It meant breathing without fear. The house was small but welcoming, the smell of fresh coffee and homemade bread filling the air. A girl of about 8 was playing in the backyard, visible through the kitchen door. A black cat was stretched out asleep on a chair, completely at ease. "I'm Dorothy," the woman introduced herself, indicating the kitchen table for us to sit. "Zoe called me last night, after you left the gathering. She said she had met a woman who needed help, that she thought you would come back looking for her. We were expecting you." The tears came again, this time of pure relief. The idea that someone was waiting for me, prepared to help me, even without knowing me well, was almost incomprehensible after years of living isolated, believing I was alone in the world. Dorothy served coffee for me, chocolate milk for Marina, and sat with us at the table. Her gaze was direct, without judgment. "My husband was the same," she said simply, rolling up the sleeve of her dress to show a long scar on her forearm. "This was from when he broke a bottle on my head, the last time, before I took my daughters and left home in the middle of the night." I looked at the scar, then at the girl playing in the yard. "And how did you manage?" Dorothy smiled, a smile that had no joy, only determination. "One day at a time. I won't lie and say it was easy. It wasn't, but it was possible. And that's what you need to know now, Janet. It is possible. Difficult, scary, uncertain, but possible." In the days that followed, I plunged into the depths of despair like never before. Dorothy's house was safe, but I knew we couldn't stay there forever. James wasn't a man to give up easily. When he realized we had fled, he would turn the entire city upside down to find us. The news came the next morning, brought by Zoe, who came to visit her sister with the excuse of bringing fresh bread. James had returned from work, found the house empty, and gone crazy. He broke furniture, yelled at neighbors, threatened anyone who dared to have helped us. He went to the police station to report our disappearance, claiming that I had mental problems, that it wasn't safe for Marina to be under my care. "The police are looking for you," Zoe explained, her voice low so that Marina, playing with Dorothy's niece in the yard, wouldn't hear. "Not as fugitives, but as missing persons who need to be rescued." My stomach sank with this information. I knew all too well James's ability to manipulate situations, to present himself as a victim, to convince others that he was a husband concerned about his unstable wife. Who would believe me, a woman with no education, no money, no social position, against the word of a respected bank security guard in the community? It was the lowest point in my life. Sitting on the borrowed bed in Dorothy's house, hearing the children's laughter in the yard, knowing that at any moment we could be discovered and forced to return to that hell. I thought about giving up, simply surrendering, accepting my fate. It would be easier, wouldn't it? Going back to the familiar cage, to the familiar violence, to the life that, as bad as it was, at least I knew how to navigate. But then I would hear Marina's laughter outside, a rare, precious sound that had almost disappeared in the last years in our house. I saw how she flourished in just these few days of freedom, talking animatedly with Dorothy's daughter, helping in the kitchen, sleeping without nightmares for the first time in months. And I knew I couldn't go back. No matter how deep the well of despair I found myself in, I wouldn't drag my daughter back to that life. She deserved more. We both deserved more. It was at that moment, at the bottom of the well, that I found the courage that would sustain me for the next days, weeks, months. A courage born not from hope, but from the absolute lack of alternatives. The courage of the desperate, of those who have nothing more to lose. "We need to leave," I told Dorothy that night after putting Marina to sleep. "Far from Oakland, to a place where he can't find us." Dorothy nodded as if she had already expected this. "I have a cousin in San Diego. She can take you in for a while until you can get established. It's not ideal, but it's far enough. San Diego, another part of the state, another life." The idea was scary and liberating at the same time. Far from everything I knew, but also far from James. A complete new beginning. "How will we get there?" I asked, the practical question hiding the whirlwind of emotions that the idea provoked. Dorothy smiled, a conspiratorial smile that lit up her tired face. "I have a plan. It's not perfect, but it might work." And so, in the depths of my despair, a small light began to shine. Faint, flickering, threatened by winds from all sides, but still a light. The possibility of escape, of freedom, of a life I still couldn't fully imagine, but that I knew was better than the one I had left behind. That night, for the first time since we fled, I slept without dreaming of James. Instead, I dreamed of the San Diego sea that I had never seen, of an open sky without bars or limits, of an uncertain but my own future, completely my own. There are moments in life that function as doors. Once we pass through them, there's no going back. The decision to flee to San Diego was one of those doors. On the other side, an unknown world awaited, frightening in its vastness of possibilities, but infinitely better than the prison I was leaving behind. Dorothy's plan was simple in theory, complicated in execution. She had an acquaintance who worked transporting goods between San Francisco and San Diego. Not exactly a regular truck driver, more one of those men who live on the margins of legality, taking and bringing products without many questions. For an amount she gathered among friends, he agreed to take us along with the cargo. It won't be comfortable, Dorothy explained, as we prepared the few things we would take. But no one will look for you in a merchandise truck, and he knows alternative routes that avoid the main inspection posts. The idea of traveling hidden in a truck with Marina gave me chills, but the alternative, being found by James, was infinitely worse. I accepted the plan with the resignation of someone who has no better choices. The departure was set for the early morning of Thursday, 3 days after our escape. Days I spent in a constant state of alert, jumping at every noise in the street, imagining James or the police knocking at the door at any moment. Dorothy kept the windows closed, the curtains drawn. She didn't allow us to go out, not even to the yard during the day. "He's roaming the neighborhood," Zoe reported on one of her furtive visits. "He showed your photo to the shopkeepers, offered a reward for anyone who gives information. He's telling everyone that you had a nervous breakdown, that you're not in a condition to take care of the girl." The anger I felt upon hearing this was like fire in my veins, an almost forgotten sensation after years of constant fear. Anger was a luxury I couldn't afford myself in James's house, where any strong emotion could trigger violence. Now, away from him, I let the anger flow, fueling the determination to escape forever. On the night before the trip, after putting Marina to sleep with promises of an exciting adventure in the morning, I sat with Dorothy in the small kitchen of the house. The silence between us was comfortable, the kind of silence that only exists between women who share experiences too deep to be expressed in words. "Are you afraid?" she finally asked, serving a strong coffee that we drank without sugar. Luxuries were scarce in those days. "More than I can say," I admitted, staring at the dark liquid in the cup. "Not of James, not anymore. I'm afraid of failing, of not being able to take care of Marina alone, of ending up on the street, or worse, of being forced to go back." Dorothy covered my hand with hers, the calluses on our fingers meeting like old acquaintances. "The fear doesn't go away," she said, with the wisdom of someone who had already traveled that path. "It just changes shape. But with time, you learn to transform it into fuel instead of letting it be an obstacle." Her words echoed in my mind for the rest of the night, as I arranged and rearranged the small bag with our clothes, the documents carefully hidden in an inner pocket, the few mementos I managed to bring in the hasty escape. A photo of Marina as a baby, the small crucifix that had been my mother's, a hair ribbon that my daughter adored. At 3 a.m, the discreet noise of an engine in the street announced the arrival of our transportation. I woke Marina carefully, helped her dress in the dark, whispering words of encouragement that I hoped sounded more confident than I felt. "We're going on an adventure, honey. To a new city, where there's a beach and we can start all over again." Her sleepy eyes widened in the dark, mixing childish excitement with an understanding that went beyond her years. "Dad won't find us there, right?" "No," I promised, trying to believe it with all my might. "There it will be just the two of us." The truck was old, with peeling paint and a strong smell of diesel. The driver, a middle-aged man named Tony, barely looked at us when Dorothy introduced us. The less he knew about us, the less he would have to tell if questioned. "In the back, there's a space between the boxes," he indicated, opening the canvas that covered the truck bed. "It's not much, but enough for you two to settle in. There's a blanket and a gallon of water. Don't make noise at the stops. Don't appear until I tell you it's safe." I hugged Dorothy tightly, words of gratitude stuck in my throat. She just nodded, understanding what I couldn't say. Then she helped Marina climb onto the truck bed, then extended her hand to help me do the same. "Everything will be all right," were her last words before the canvas was lowered, leaving us in almost complete darkness, with only thin strips of early morning light filtered through the tears in the fabric. The space between the boxes was tight, barely enough for the two of us to sit. I hugged Marina against me, feeling her small body tremble slightly. From cold or fear, I couldn't tell. "It's like a secret cabin," I whispered in her ear when the engine roared louder and the truck began to move. "Only the two of us know we're here." She nodded against my chest, clutching my blouse as she did when she was very little. For a moment, the enormity of what we were doing hit me like a wave, leaving everything behind, traveling clandestinely in an uncomfortable truck, heading to a city where we knew no one, without money, without concrete plans, just the vague promise of a new beginning. Fear tried to swallow me in that dark and confined space. But then I remembered Dorothy's words. Transform fear into fuel. I took a deep breath, holding Marina closer, and let the swaying of the truck on the rough roads lull us into an uneasy sleep. The journey to San Diego took almost 2 days. 2 days of suffocating heat under the canvas, of constant thirst rationing the gallon of water, of aching muscles from the impossibility of completely stretching our legs, of scares every time the truck stopped at some gas station or police checkpoint. Tony only allowed us out at strategic stops, away from curious eyes, usually in the middle of the night on secondary roads. 5 minutes to stretch our legs, take care of necessities behind some bush, eat a piece of bread or cracker that he passed to us without ceremony. "All clear so far," he informed during one of these stops, at the border between Northern and Southern California. "But you better stay hidden. You never know." Marina endured everything with a resilience that surprised me and broke my heart at the same time. No child should go through that, hidden like a fugitive, afraid of their own father. But she didn't complain, didn't cry, just squeezed my hand in moments of greater tension and smiled bravely when I tried to distract her with whispered stories or silent games. Finally, on the early morning of the second day, I felt the truck reduce speed, make several turns, and stop completely. The canvas was lifted, letting in the fresh night air and the unmistakable smell of sea salt. San Diego. "We've arrived," Tony announced, helping us down from the truck bed with wobbly legs and aching bodies. "This is as far as I can take you." We were in some kind of warehouse on the outskirts of the city, far from the busier areas. The driver indicated a nearby street where we could catch a bus to Dorothy's cousin's address. "Good luck," he said simply, before returning to the truck cabin and leaving without looking back. There we were, Marina and I, alone in an unknown city, at 4 in the morning, with only the address scribbled on a paper and some crumpled bills that Dorothy had managed to get for us. Fear returned with full force, now accompanied by a sense of vertigo in the face of the unknown. "What now, Mom?" Marina asked, rubbing her tired eyes, her little face dirty from the road dust. "Now we move forward," I answered, adjusting the bag on my shoulder and taking her hand, one step at a time. We found the bus stop, waited almost 2 hours for the first morning bus, asked the sleepy driver the best way to reach our destination. When we finally got off in the indicated neighborhood, City Heights, a simple but decent area of the city, the sun was already high in the sky, illuminating the sea that could be glimpsed in the distance. Dorothy's cousin, Mrs. Rachel, was a heavy-set woman of about 60, with a severe face that softened when she saw us standing at her door, exhausted and frightened. "Dorothy called to let me know you were coming," she said, opening the door wider. "Come in. You must be dead tired." The house was small but clean, with the comforting smell of coffee and the sound of a television turned on in the background. An old dog raised its head when we entered, examined us with eyes clouded by age, and went back to sleep, apparently accepting us as part of the house. "You can stay in the little room in the back," Rachel indicated, leading us through the living room and kitchen to a small room that clearly served as storage, but had been partially cleaned to receive us. "It's not much, but it's enough for you to rest while you decide what to do." The mattress on the floor, covered with clean sheets, seemed like the most luxurious of hotels after 2 nights in the truck bed. Marina fell asleep as soon as she lay down, fatigue finally overcoming the adrenaline that had kept her alert during the trip. I stayed awake a bit longer, observing the peeling ceiling, listening to the unknown sounds of this new city. The distant barking of dogs, the noise of children playing in the street, the neighbor's radio playing country music. We were more than 500 miles from Oakland, from James, from the life we knew. The distance seemed both immense and insufficient. "He'll find me," I thought, fear still present like a stubborn shadow. He always says that, if I run away, he'll find me even if it's at the end of the world. But then, looking at Marina sleeping peacefully beside me, something changed inside me. An almost audible click, like a key turning in a lock. No, he wouldn't find us. Because I wouldn't allow it. Because the woman who fled from Oakland was no longer the same one who lived for years accepting abuse, believing there was no escape. The fear was still there. But now there was something stronger growing beside it. A fierce determination to protect my daughter, to build a new life, to never be a victim again. Fear was transforming into courage. The first months in San Diego were hard, I won't lie. Rachel was generous in her rustic way, giving us shelter and food, but made it clear from the beginning that we couldn't stay indefinitely. I have my own life, my own problems, she explained, without beating around the bush. You can stay until you find something, but you need to get by soon. I started looking for work immediately. Without education, without references, afraid to use my real documents and be tracked by James, the options were limited. I accepted what appeared first: cleaning houses for families, a few hours a week, payment on the spot, no questions asked. The work was exhausting. My hands soon became rough from chemicals. My back constantly ached. But each coin I gathered, each crumpled bill I hid in a hole in the mattress, some habits never change, represented a step away from dependency, a brick in the construction of our new life. Marina began attending the local school. At first, she was reluctant, afraid to make friends, to become attached to a place we might have to leave in a hurry. But soon, the natural curiosity of childhood overcame the trauma, and she began to bring home stories of classmates, of teachers, of a world that spun without the constant shadow of fear. 3 months after our arrival, I had already gathered enough to rent a small room in a boarding house not far from Rachel's house. It was tiny, just space for a bed that we shared, a 2-burner stove, a makeshift closet with crates. The bathroom was shared with 3 other families. But it was ours, the first space we could call our own, without James's oppressive presence. The day we moved in, Marina ran around the little room, examining every corner as if it were a palace. "Look, Mom, there's a window where you can see the sky," she exclaimed, pointing to the small opening in the wall that barely deserved to be called a window. I sat on the edge of the bed, our only real piece of furniture bought second-hand, and cried. Not from sadness, not from fear, but from an emotion I couldn't name. Relief, perhaps. Or the hesitant beginning of something that seemed like happiness. It was in that little room that we really began to rebuild ourselves, to create routines that weren't dictated by James's mood, to make plans that didn't need to be hidden, to dream of a future that seemed increasingly possible. But fear doesn't disappear overnight, not after years living under its dominion. I still jumped at every knock on the door, still looked over my shoulder in the streets, still woke up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, imagining James standing next to the bed. It was Marina who helped me transform this residual fear into strength. Her ability to adapt, her rediscovered joy, her enthusiasm with each small achievement, a new book borrowed from school, a friend inviting her to play, a compliment from the teacher, reminded me daily why I had risked everything. "You're the bravest person I know, Mom," she told me one night, as we ate a simple meal of beans and rice, sitting on the bed that also served as a sofa and table. Braver than Wonder Woman. I laughed at the childish comparison, but her words touched something deep. Was I really brave? I had never thought of myself in those terms. I had done what needed to be done, what any mother would do to protect her daughter. But perhaps that was the true definition of courage. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The year 1988 brought changes for America and for us. In the country, new laws promised equal rights for men and women, protections against domestic violence, a new beginning. For me and Marina came the first real feeling of security. I got a better job at a small inn near the beach, cleaning rooms, helping in the kitchen, eventually learning to welcome guests. The salary was still small, but regular, with proper employment. I used a different name, of course. I still didn't trust that James had given up on finding us. The owner of the inn, Mrs. Celeste, a woman from New England who came to California still young and stayed, became not only my boss, but a mentor. She perceived my potential beyond the simple tasks she initially assigned me, taught me words in Spanish to help foreign tourists, encouraged me to learn the operations of the business. "You have a good head," she would say in her characteristic accent. "You just lacked opportunity in life." With the new job, we managed to move to a small but decent apartment with 2 tiny bedrooms. For the first time since the escape, Marina had her own space. I bought furniture little by little, simple pieces second-hand that I restored in my spare time, painting, sanding, transforming what others discarded into treasures for us. It was during this period that fear finally began to lose strength. It didn't disappear completely. Even today, so many years later, I sometimes wake up startled with a nightmare where James finds me, but it ceased to be the dominant force in my life. In its place, something new was growing. Confidence in my abilities, in my decisions, in the future I was building day by day with my own hands. More than a year had passed since our escape when I received a phone call that made my blood freeze. It was Dorothy calling from a payphone in San Francisco, her voice tense and hurried. "He discovered where you went," she said without preamble. "Someone from the truck talked, or maybe someone saw me arranging the trip. He's coming to San Diego." The familiar panic tried to reinstall itself, the old sensation of having my stomach falling into a bottomless pit. But something different happened. Instead of paralyzing me, fear instantly transformed into action. I called Mrs. Celeste, explained the situation in the briefest possible way. I didn't need to tell all the details. She was an experienced woman, had seen enough of life to understand what wasn't said. "Come to my house with the girl," she ordered without hesitation. "I have a friend in the police. We'll solve this." That night, sitting in Mrs. Celeste's comfortable living room, I told my complete story for the first time. The years of abuse, the desperate escape, the slow and painful reconstruction in San Diego. The police friend, a serious middle-aged man called Sergeant Roberts, listened to everything in silence, occasionally taking notes in a small notebook. When I finished, I expected disbelief. Perhaps even the suggestion that I should return to my husband and sort things out like civilized people. It was what society at the time often told women in my situation. Instead, the sergeant closed the notebook, looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Ma'am, we'll ensure he doesn't get near you or your daughter. The law has changed. You have rights now." Rights. The word seemed strange, almost incomprehensible after a lifetime being treated as property. The right to live without fear, the right to say no, the right to exist as a complete person, not as an extension of a man. In the days that followed, with the help of Mrs. Celeste and Sergeant Roberts, I filed a police report against James, got a restraining order, put on paper the entire history of abuse I had kept inside me for so long. "He could reach the city at any moment," the sergeant explained. "But as soon as he sets foot here, I'll know, and he won't get close to you." That night, lying next to Marina, who slept without knowing the danger approaching, I realized that something fundamental had changed. Fear was still there, of course. I would be foolish to deny it. But it was no longer the paralyzing, crushing fear that made me small and powerless. It was a fear I knew well, that I looked in the eyes and said, "Not today, not this time, never again." Fear had completely transformed into courage. They say the true measure of a person isn't in never falling, but in how many times they can get back up. If that's true, then I think I've become an expert in getting up. Each time stronger, each time more determined, each time more myself. James arrived in San Diego on a scorching hot Tuesday, typical of that coastal city that I was already beginning to consider mine. I knew this because Sergeant Roberts called me at the inn, his voice calm but firm. "He's here. But don't worry, we're watching him." I confess I trembled when hanging up the phone. Knowing that he was breathing the same air, walking the same streets, was just a few miles away. It was like feeling the shadow of a nightmare that refused to completely disappear. But I wasn't the same frightened woman who had fled hidden in a truck. Now I had official documents protecting me, authorities on my side, a support network. Mrs. Celeste, the sergeant, neighbors, and colleagues who, even without knowing my whole story, had noticed enough to become silent protectors of me and Marina. James's first attempt to approach was 3 days after his arrival. He showed up at Marina's school, introducing himself as the father looking for his daughter, kidnapped by her unbalanced mother. Luckily, I had talked to the principal weeks before, when the first rumors of James's search reached my ears. She not only denied knowing any girl with the name and description provided, but also discreetly alerted the police while a staff member kept him distracted at the gate. When Sergeant Roberts arrived, James had already left, probably suspicious of the delay. But it was enough to confirm that he wouldn't give up easily. "We need to be more cautious," the sergeant told me that night, sitting in the small living room of our apartment while Marina slept in the bedroom. "He seems determined." For 2 weeks, I lived in a constant state of alert. We changed routines, different paths to school, altered schedules at work, always accompanied by someone on comings and goings. Marina noticed something was wrong, of course. Children sense adults' fear as animals sense the approach of a storm. "It's Dad, isn't it?" she asked one night as we prepared a simple stew together for dinner. "He found us." I saw no point in lying. She was old enough to understand, had lived enough to have the right to the truth. "Yes, honey. But we're protected now. We have people helping us." Her eyes, so similar to mine, studied me with an intensity no child should have. "I won't let him hurt you again," she said with a fierce conviction that broke my heart and filled it with pride at the same time. Never again. The confrontation I so feared happened on a Saturday morning, almost 3 weeks after James's arrival in San Diego. I was at the neighborhood farmer's market, buying fruits and vegetables for the week, Marina by my side carrying the bag of potatoes we had just purchased. An everyday, common moment that suddenly froze when I heard that voice. The voice that populated my nightmares. "Finally found you, Janet." I turned slowly, my heart pounding, but my hands firmly pushing Marina behind me in an instinctive gesture of protection. There he was, a few meters away, thinner than I remembered, with deep dark circles and an unshaved beard I had never seen before. James had always been obsessive about his appearance, but the green eyes were the same. Those eyes that once seemed beautiful to me and later became the window to a private hell. "What do you want?" I asked, surprised at the firmness of my own voice. "What a stupid question," he laughed, a sound without humor. "I want my family back. I want my daughter. I want my wife." His family. His daughter. His wife. Always the possessive pronouns. Always the language of ownership. "We are not yours," I replied, feeling Marina grabbing my blouse behind me. "Never again." His face contorted into an expression I knew all too well. That frightening transformation from the apparently normal man to the monster that lived under the skin. For an instant of pure terror, I thought he would advance against us right there in the middle of the crowded market. But then I realized something. The people around us had stopped what they were doing. Vendors, customers, all watching the scene with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. We were no longer alone within the 4 walls of our house in Oakland. It was no longer just my word against his. "It would be better if we talked in private," James said, trying to soften his tone, assuming that posture of concerned husband he used so well in public. "Come with me, Janet. Let's sort this out like adults." "There's nothing to sort out," I replied, taking a step back, still protecting Marina. "It's over, James. We have a restraining order against you. You can't approach us." I mentioned the restraining order purposely, loud enough for the curious spectators to hear. I saw the recognition in the eyes of a nearby lady, the nod of understanding from a burly vendor who began to approach discreetly. "Restraining order?" James practically spat the words, the mask of civility slipping. "Based on your lies. You've always been unstable, always making up stories." I felt Marina trembling behind me, but I also felt something unexpected. She took a step to the side, becoming partially visible. "You used to hit my mom," she said in a small but clear voice. "I saw it. Many times." James turned pale. It was one thing to accuse his wife of lying, quite another to face the testimony of his own daughter in front of dozens of strangers. "Marina," he began, extending his hand towards her. "Little girl, you don't understand." She backed away, clutching my blouse more tightly. "I'm not your little girl. I never want to see you again." They were the cruelest words that could be said to a man like James, whose entire identity was built on the control he exercised over his family. I saw something break in his eyes, not regret, not wounded love, but pure anger, that familiar anger that preceded his worst moments of violence. "You turned her against me," he growled, taking a step in our direction. "Poisoned the mind of my own daughter." That's when I felt a solid presence beside me, the burly vendor who sold fish at the stall next to the fruit one. "Any problem here, Mrs. Janet?" he asked, arms crossed over his broad chest, eyes fixed on James. He wasn't the only one. I noticed that other people had approached, forming a kind of human barrier between us and James. People who knew me from months of shopping there, who saw Marina grow, who exchanged smiles and casual conversations with me. People who perhaps didn't know my complete story, but recognized the fear in a woman's eyes, the threatening posture of a man about to become violent. "This man can't approach us," I explained, my voice firmer now. "There's a court order." Someone murmured that the police had already been called. Another person commented that they knew the neighborhood sheriff. A third offered to take us to their house until everything was resolved. I saw the slow understanding in James's eyes. He was no longer in Oakland, where people lowered their eyes to domestic violence, where neighbors pretended not to hear screams through thin walls, where, in husband and wife fights, no one sticks their spoon, was an unwritten law. He was in a place where he was just another violent man, without the respect his job and position guaranteed him, without the fear he inspired in those who knew him. When the police cruiser arrived, minutes later, James had already backed away, not without casting a final look that promised this wouldn't end there. But for the first time, I didn't tremble at that silent threat. I had something I had never had before, a community around me, people willing to witness, to intervene, to care. James was taken to provide clarification. The restraining order was reinforced, new protection measures were implemented. He still tried a few more times to contact us, threatening letters sent to the inn, a frustrated attempt to approach me as I left work, phone calls in the middle of the night. But each attempt met a more solid barrier than the previous one. The police, alerted by Sergeant Roberts, detained him for violating the restraining order. Mrs. Celeste hired a security guard for the inn. Neighbors began to accompany us on comings and goings, and I, each day, became less the frightened victim he had known and more the determined woman I was learning to be. The last news I had of James was about 6 months after this confrontation at the market. Sergeant Roberts informed me that he had been arrested for assaulting a man in a bar. Apparently, the alcohol and frustration of not being able to recover us had resulted in a violent explosion that left the victim hospitalized. "He got 3 years, the sergeant told me. "When he gets out, I doubt he'll come after you again. Men like him usually seek easier targets." Easier targets. The phrase stayed with me for a long time, a painful reminder of how many other women would be living the hell I managed to escape. But it was also a catalyst for the next phase of my life. With James in prison and the threat temporarily removed, I could finally breathe more freely, plan beyond immediate survival. Marina was adapting well to school, had made friends, was slowly leaving behind the traumas of the years in Oakland. I was progressing in my work at the inn, now not only cleaning rooms but helping at the reception, learning the operation of the business, even practicing some Spanish words with the foreign tourists who were beginning to discover the beaches of San Diego. It was Mrs. Celeste who first planted the seed that would change my life once again. "Janet, you have a way with people," she commented one day, after watching me calm an elderly couple of guests who were frustrated with a plumbing problem in their room. "You know how to listen, to understand what they need even when they can't explain it properly." I thanked her for the compliment, not understanding where she was going. "Did you know there's a course to finish your studies nearby? At night, for adults who didn't complete their education." "I think you should consider it." The idea seemed absurd at first glance. Me, at 33, going back to school, with a full-time job, a daughter to raise, so many other responsibilities. But once planted, the idea refused to die. I started adult education in 1990, attending classes 3 nights a week after work. Marina, now 14 and increasingly independent, stayed with Mrs. Celeste's daughter on class nights. The two had become inseparable friends, almost sisters. The first months were brutally difficult. My brain seemed rusty after so long away from studies. The nights were too short, divided between homework, household chores, and the little rest I could get. Many times I thought about giving up, convinced I was fooling myself, that women like me didn't get a second chance in education. But then I would receive a good grade on an assignment, or understand a concept that seemed impossible, or simply feel that wave of satisfaction from learning something new. And I continued. One day at a time, one lesson at a time, one small victory at a time. I completed high school in 1993 at 36 years old. The graduation ceremony was simple, held in the courtyard of the municipal school that housed the adult education program. But for me, it represented a milestone that would have seemed impossible a few years earlier. Marina was in the front row, applauding so hard her hands turned red. Beside her, Mrs. Celeste smiled like a proud mother. Friends I had made over the years, co-workers, neighbors, study companions, all gathered to celebrate not just my educational achievement, but the much larger journey it represented. It was there, holding my diploma with hands that still showed calluses from years of hard work, that I made another decision that would change my life. I would continue studying. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I wouldn't stop there. The how came in the form of a scholarship program for women in vulnerable situations, offered by a non-governmental organization in partnership with a local college. Mrs. Celeste saw the announcement in the newspaper, cut it out, and practically forced me to apply. The worst that can happen is they say no, she argued when I tried to explain that women like me didn't go to college. So what? You faced much worse things than a refusal. She was right, of course. After fleeing from an abusive husband, rebuilding a life from scratch in a strange city, and raising a daughter alone while working and studying, a simple no longer seemed so frightening. To my surprise, the answer was yes. In 1994, at 37 years old, I started a course in social work, chosen not only because it was one of the few options available in the scholarship program, but because something in that profession resonated deeply with me. The idea of helping people find ways out of situations that seemed impossible. The next 4 years were a roller coaster of challenges and discoveries. I worked at the inn during the day, studied at night, took advantage of every free minute for readings and assignments. Marina, now a teenager, took on more and more responsibilities at home, cooking when I arrived late, managing her own school routine with a maturity that sometimes made me feel guilty for everything she had been forced to face at such a young age. "Don't worry so much, Mom," she told me one night when she found me crying from exhaustion over an assignment that seemed impossible to finish on time. "I'm proud of you. I always wanted to be like you when I grew up." "Like me?" I asked, surprised. "Why?" "Because you never give up," she answered simply. "No matter how hard it gets, you always find a way." Her words were the fuel that kept me going forward in the most difficult moments. And there were many. Professors who doubted my ability because of my age or my Oakland accent that I never completely lost. Young classmates who didn't understand my references or life experiences, the constant battle against fatigue and insecurity. But there were also profound joys, the discovery that my life experience was valuable in discussions about social policies, friendships with people I would never have met in my previous life, the pure pleasure of learning, of expanding horizons, of better understanding the world around me, and mainly, the growing sense of purpose. Each course on domestic violence, each lecture on women's rights, each internship at support centers for victims made me think, this is why I survived, to help others survive too. I graduated in social work in 1998, at 41 years old. Marina, then 22, was beginning her own university journey in education. The first generation of our family to have access to higher education from the beginning, without the detours and obstacles I faced. On the day of my graduation, as I waited in line to receive my diploma, I looked at the audience and saw not only Marina and Mrs. Celeste, but a small crowd of familiar faces. Women I had met during internships who had stories similar to mine. Colleagues from the inn who had covered my shifts when I needed to study for important exams. Neighbors who had taken care of Marina in emergencies. Sergeant Roberts, now promoted to lieutenant, who continued to be a friend and protector even years after the threat of James had disappeared on the horizon. That's when I realized I had built much more than a new life in San Diego. I had built a community, a network of mutual support, a place where I truly belonged, not out of fear or obligation, but by choice and genuine connection. My professional career began at the same support center where I had interned in the last year of college, a non-governmental organization that offered temporary shelter, legal and psychological assistance for women in situations of domestic violence. The salary was minimal, the working conditions far from ideal, the daily challenges sometimes overwhelming. But each woman we managed to help leave an abusive relationship, each child we saw flourish away from the environment of violence, each small victory against a system that still favored aggressors, it was all worth it. Over time, I took on more responsibilities, developing specific programs based on my own experience. One of the most successful was a professional training course for women who, like me years before, needed to rebuild their lives from scratch, without formal education, without recognized work experience, often without documents or references. If I could do it, you can too, I would say to each new class of women with frightened eyes and bodies marked by visible and invisible scars. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. But it's possible. The years went by, each bringing new achievements, new challenges, new joys and sorrows, as is the life of any person. Marina graduated, started working as a teacher, fell in love with a colleague, a gentle and respectful young man who was the opposite of everything James represented. When she told me they were getting married, my heart filled with a joy I didn't know was possible to feel. "Are you sure, honey?" I asked, not because I doubted their love, but because I knew the dangers hidden behind closed doors. "I am, Mom," she answered, holding my hands. "And do you know why? Because you taught me to recognize true love, to never confuse love with control, affection with possession. You taught me that I deserve respect, that I have value for myself, not as someone's property." Her words were the greatest reward I could imagine for all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, all the moments of doubt and fear. My daughter would be different. She would have choices I didn't have, freedoms that were denied to me, opportunities I could only dream of. Their wedding was simple but joyful, held on the beach at sunset. As I watched Marina dancing with her husband, laughing at something he whispered in her ear, I felt a deep peace settling inside me. The cycle had been broken. The legacy of violence that threatened to pass from one generation to another had been interrupted. The years continued to pass. I became a grandmother. First to Lily, a little girl with the same determined eyes as her mother. Then to Philip, a gentle boy who loved books like his grandmother. I saw my work at the support center expand, receive recognition, inspire similar initiatives in other cities. I continued studying, taking specialization courses, participating in conferences where, to my surprise, I was invited as a speaker, not just as a listener. In 2010, at 53 years old, I received an invitation I would never have imagined possible to take over the general coordination of the center where I had worked for more than a decade. The responsibility was enormous, the challenges even greater, but I accepted without hesitation. Each day in that position was an opportunity to shape policies, influence decisions, open doors for other women who, like me, only needed a chance to show their strength. Today, looking back at my 68 years from the porch of this simple but comfortable house in Monterey, California, yes, I returned to the state where it all began, but this time by choice, not out of fear. I see a life that took directions I could never have predicted in those dark days under James's control. I officially retired 5 years ago, but I continue to be active as a consultant, speaker, and informal mentor for younger women who follow the path I helped open. Marina and her family live nearby. My grandchildren are already teenagers, growing up in a world that, although still far from perfect for women, offers protections and possibilities that didn't exist in my youth. As for James, I learned by chance, through an old acquaintance from Oakland that I met on a visit to the city years ago, that he died in 2005, alone in a cheap boarding house room, his liver destroyed by the alcohol that was always his most faithful companion. I felt no joy at the news, nor sadness, just a strange sense of closure, like closing a book whose story no longer interests us. If there's a lesson I would like to leave for you who are watching me, it's this: it's never too late to start over. You're never completely broken to the point where you can't be rebuilt. Fear is never so great that it can't be transformed into courage. We are like those stubborn flowers that find cracks in the concrete to grow. The world may try to crush us, bury us, cover us with darkness, but if there's a minimal crack of light, a small space for roots to take hold, we will bloom. Against all odds, despite all obstacles, we will bloom. And now, my dears, before I say goodbye, I'd like to ask a little favor. If this story touched your heart in some way, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Each subscription is an encouragement for other grandparents like me to share their experiences, their pains, and their victories. Thank you for listening to me up to this point. May God bless each one of your paths, and may you never lack the courage to transform pain into strength, fear into action, and scars into wisdom.